people recognizing each other. Nice. Okay, should we get started then? And welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning after, I think, our short summer break, which this is our actually 23rd event in the series. And for those who weren't on previous calls, just a reminder that obviously we will record these. If you've got any questions, please raise your hand. Feel free to ask any questions at the end of presentations, but don't store them up, because you've got the chat at the bottom there that you can add any questions to anyone as we go through it. And if you're interested, I'll share this video, and of course I'll share copies of today's presentations with you afterwards. And the lovely Ralph Mann, our extraordinary illustrator, is also joined us today, who no doubt will be creating a visual of today's presentation, which will summarise everything we've talked about. As many of you will have heard this morning, there's been quite a lot of news around the changes in social gatherings. We're now back down to 6 people, and it's actually going to be illegal the first time from Monday, so that they're passing a law, I guess, to enable PLOD to have more ways in which they can basically enforce the law. And it does mean, obviously, from a Pimento point of view, that the likelihood of us being able to get back with our 6 PM clubs in the foreseeable future, I'm afraid, has been put on the back burner. That said, we found a way around it in a couple of areas, and we've been doing our net walking, devised by Andy Clark there, down in Bath a couple of weeks ago, and we had apparently a delightful session with 2 groups of 6, walking from Bath Central Station to a lovely pub in the countryside with 2 outdoor tables, and it was great to be able to get members together and out of the home in a lovely part of the country. We're going to be repeating that. David's organising a couple of walks over the next couple of weeks. Not as pretty as Bath, but we'll be starting, I think, at Regent's Park and going to Hyde Park, and similarly we found a couple of restaurants where we can actually have a bite to eat outside. So if you're able to join any of those, or you're interested in coming along those, please contact David. What the new rules will also mean is that things like the leadership dinners and some of the other things that we had in plan may have to be revised. So I'm sorry about that. There is still some clarity required around the fact that we can actually still, however, go to the workplace. You can still go to school, and you can still obviously go to funerals and organise team sports events, but you just can't spend any time with people outside of your immediate family in any groups of more than 6. So again, you know, confusion reigns, and no doubt nothing will become clearer when Boris tells us this afternoon at 4. So wait for that one. That'll be exciting. Just also flag that next week we're doing something a little bit different, and I want to get you in your diaries now, if I may. We've got Andrew Cooper, Lord Cooper of Windrush, who will be basically our lead on next week's call. It'll be a slightly different format because it also coincides with an event that we've been sponsors of for the last 3 years, which ordinarily will be physical up in lovely Leeds. This year it's a virtual event, and it's part of the VMC, Visual Media Conference, and Pimento has its own dedicated channel on a different platform for the day, and we'll send you a link after today's presentation so that you can register for that. But for those that don't know Andrew Cooper, he's the founder and president of the research and strategy consultancy Populous. He advises a wide range of profile businesses, organizations and campaigns. And interestingly enough, he served as director of strategy to the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, strategy. And he worked 3 years at the Conservative Liberal Democratic Coalition. He was senior advisor in 2010, 2015 for the UK general elections, 2016 Scottish Parliament elections, and the No campaign in 2014. So he comes with a huge amount of insight around politics, and I've asked him to do some modelling for us. He's done some excellent data and analytics on the last few elections, both here and also in Europe and in North America, and he's going to be able to give some insights as to what's happening to politics on a geo basis, and actually how that can influence, obviously, us in the UK and what's likely to happen in the American election. So I think that'll be quite an interesting session. It's for only 45 minutes. It's next Wednesday at same time, 11 o'clock. And Teresa, if you could send a link to everybody during the course of today's call, that would be really helpful. And thank you, Ralph. He's put up the photograph of last week's networking event, which is a delightful piece of artwork. So if you get the chance to have a look at that during the call, please do. Right, back to today. Today we're going to explore the haves and have-nots, and it's not, I think, a financial imperative there or description, although creativity hopefully leads to more haves than have-nots. We're going to be identifying and deploying the conditions for greater creativity, and obviously we've all been challenged during lockdown, during COVID, as to how we can get our teams to continue to be highly productive when it comes to creativity. Firehaus, who are a new member of Pimento that joined us very recently, are going to be sharing their framework for the 9 conditions of creativity, how to identify your own creative gap and what to do about it. For those that don't know Firehaus, they're a creative consultancy born out of the belief that creativity is the most important driver of competitive advantage and growth. It helps businesses survive, it helps businesses transform and thrive. And Firehaus work with both agencies and clients. So they've worked with the likes of, on the agency side, of Collinson, R-Cubed, to help define their purpose, proposition, and routes for growth. And they've worked with brands like the NHS, the RAC, Yo Valley, and UN Women. And business has been in existence for 18 months. They've been virtual from day one, so they made a virtue out of being virtual. So they're well positioned for things when it all went peak tong in March. And they're going to basically hopefully give us some really interesting insights to what we can all do to improve creativity within our own businesses, however small or large. Now, obviously, one of the major blockers to creativity is our own mental health of mind, our mental state, if you like. And Michelle Morgan, who I know many of you already know on previous presentations, is a first aid ambassador. He's also the founder of Pjoys. For those who don't know, Pjoys is a business with purpose at its heart, and she'll tell us a little bit more about that today. But she's going to be sharing in a slightly longer session than I've allowed her in the past, and some of the work that she's been doing in this space. And as you're probably aware, she's launched a special Pimento proposition, a special member opportunity and non-member opportunity for that matter, to get more involved, get more in touch with your mental health. And there's a series of training programs we've put together with her. So I've asked her to tell us a little bit about those. And she's going to be talking about the SENSE framework. So welcome to our presenters. Today's presentation will be led by Ian, ably assisted by Nick and by Beth. And after their presentation, they'll then hand over to Michelle. And thank you once again. I'll shut up now.
Well, thank you very much, Stephen. Welcome everybody to our little half an hour. Just to say it's great to now be part of the Pimento family, and we look forward to making some babies with you. So I think it's worth just reflecting a little bit on the reason why Firehaus started in the first place, because we set it up out of conviction, not out of convenience. We'd become frankly disillusioned with how significant parts of the industry had forgotten what we were supposed to be doing, which is solving problems, largely around communications, but solving problems in the real world, not advertising land. And clients and agencies, for us, seem to be running on rails with no diversions, very few changes of track, and certainly they were therefore very unlikely to be finding any new destinations. So the industry might have thought of itself as creative, but this largely meant creative execution. What we'd lost was the power of creativity, that ability to reframe challenges, create new opportunities for value creation. Creativity, for many, in our experience, had simply gone missing in action. Now that's strange, because when you actually ask anybody in the industry if they want more creativity, they invariably say yes. Dentsu Aegis did a poll last year of global CMOs. 85% of CMOs said that put creativity at the top of their wish list. Only 52% believed that they actually achieved it and got it. Gartner see creativity at the heart of high-performing teams. Well, I think we know that there aren't many high-performing teams, therefore, if creativity is missing. Now, you may recognize this problem with your clients. You may recognize it in your business. Well, don't worry, because you're not alone. We've all been there. We've all seen it. We've seen businesses largely split between what we call the haves and the have-nots. I am waiting for a lawsuit from Oprah Winfrey for the use of that image, but we'll see if we can get away with it for a bit longer. Basically, those who have applied creativity to their business and those who have not. So I thought it might be fun for us to play the worst game show on the internet right now. Why don't we play the haves and have-nots? Now, you can play this on behalf of a client that you can think of, or you may want to play it on behalf of your own business. But here we go. I'm going to rattle through some questions, and you think whether you are a have or a have-not. Have you identified why your business exists? Have you got a clear proposition? Have you nurtured a fearless culture? Have you supported risk-taking? Have you got the renewable energy of creativity powering your business? Well, what we know is that the haves want more. If they've got it, they know that it's powering adaptability, resilience, and growth, but they want more. Have-nots, well, they need to rediscover creativity fast for survival, re-establishing themselves and growing again. We've seen over our years in the industry this situation, the haves and the have-nots, and where they meet is the fact that neither of them can wait, particularly now. Now is not the time to wait. Now is the time to act, which is what Firehaus is all about, because we see creativity as fueling competitive advantage. The reason being is we've seen too many brands and agencies to that point rise and fall and keep falling until they're gone. They exist in name, but there's nothing really left. Just people working to pick up their paycheck. And who the hell wants that? So we set about establishing what conditions are required to ignite creativity in business. Because how can you close the gap between what you want to be and what you are if you don't know? Over to Beth.
So today, folks, we're going to share with you a really simple framework we have developed that will help you structure how you go about thinking of unlocking greater creativity and growth in your business, or indeed potentially help your clients with how they do it in theirs. You absolutely don't have to be a creative agency for this to be applicable. We have used it with performance agencies, we've used it with research businesses who have been looking to inject, whether it's energy, proactivity, fresh impetus into the way that their people think. Because the truth is, if these conditions for creativity aren't optimal or aren't present, then it's not just creativity that suffers, whether it's focus, motivation, ambition, innovation. These things are, of course, all intrinsically linked. So I'm going to share the framework with you, and then Nick is going to give you 2 magic questions that you could ask of your teams this very afternoon, if you so wish, to help identify whether you potentially have a gap in your business that would be worthwhile taking a closer look at. Ian, do you mind clicking on to the next slide for me? Ralph, whatever you do, do not use this photo as inspiration for your doodling today. Every time I look at it, I think we look like an uglier, scarier, less Botoxed version of the Britain's Got Talent panel. I promise you, we are not as intimidating as this in real life, people. Anyway, I guess the inspiration behind developing this framework was that time and time again in the agencies that we had worked in, or the clients we'd worked alongside, or yes, indeed in the businesses that we ourselves have run, Nick, Ian and I have seen when creativity wasn't optimal, and I guess what the consequences of it not being optimal was. And Sarah, who you can see there, who is the fourth member of Firehaus, she came into the industry from a large accounting group, and she herself also saw that in the conversations she was having, whether it was with investors or CFOs. And I guess it struck us as odd that an industry that essentially prides itself on delivering innovative, insightful, creative solutions to problems was kind of, in many ways, hesitant to turn the spotlight onto itself and challenge itself to embrace or explore new ways of thinking about how it delivers in better and better ways on that problem solving promise. Ian, do you mind kicking on? But importantly, don't just take our word for it. We have lived and breathed this professionally for more years than we care to count, but there are far more brilliant and esteemed minds out there who have made their whole careers out of studying what underpins creativity. This is just a snapshot of them that you can see here. Maybe you recognize some of the faces, maybe you've read some of their work. Fortunately for all of us, there is a huge amount of consensus around what conditions need to be present in order for creativity to thrive in an organisation. Now, there might be slight nuances in the language that they use or in the focus that each of them chooses to give. But I guess having researched, reflected at length, one of the conclusions that we reached was actually that all of the conditions consistently fell into three very distinct categories. And each of those three categories, you're rushing ahead, Ian, my click assistant. Each of those three categories had three distinct components. And that in essence is where the 9 conditions framework for creativity was born. So you can absolutely trust us that this is the result not just of a significant amount of practical experience on our part, but rigorous academic review. So here are the 3 components that I guess are at the heart of the framework. These are the pillars on which the framework is built, and they are purpose, people, and culture. Now, by purpose, I don't mean purpose-led marketing, because quite rightly that comes in for a lot of flack about its superficiality. I'm talking really about purpose-led business. If you were on last week's call, you will have heard Simon and Stephen talk very eloquently about this very subject. But essentially, without the focus, ambition, and mobilizing force that authentic purpose brings to a business, creativity is absolutely stifled. It effectively doesn't have a destination or a focal point or a goal to direct itself towards. So it is fundamental. But people are also absolutely vital. People is about recognizing that everybody has creative potential. It's in all of us, but the onus can't be on an individual alone to find their spark single-handedly. It is completely vital that as leaders of businesses, we nurture talented individuals and kind of orchestrate bringing different types of perspective together. If as an organization, we're going to develop a collective wisdom and a group strength that's so important if you're trying to solve problems creatively. And lastly, culture is essentially about having an open-minded, risk-rewarding environment. It's about looking at whether there are unwritten rules or behaviours within a business which may be holding people back from doing their sharpest thinking, essentially. So how do you know, Batesy, do you mind just clicking on to the next one? How do you know then if your purpose, people and culture are set up for creativity and as a result of that set up for growth, in essence? Well, experience and research has told us that they each have 3 principal components. And here are the 9 of them in total in front of you on your screens now. And these 9 components are deliberately very real, very practical, very tangible things that are easy to identify within a business and ultimately to measure, which of course is important if you're going to then apply strategies or tactics to how you address them. And I'm going to, in a moment, take you briefly through each one. While I'm doing that, if any of these components particularly resonate with you and your experience, or a particular brand springs to mind that you think they relate to, I'd love to hear about them in the chat bar. So feel free to type away. I'm always on the lookout for new examples. Ian, if you go on to the next slide, let's start with purpose. So you can put all 3 of these up on screen, Batesy, if you like. I guess at the heart of purpose is belief. The core idea that your brand stands for. It's the belief that binds you and your colleagues and your customers together. Mark Hancock, who is a strategy director I worked with for a number of years, used to describe this as a business or a brand's North Star. And I guess I love the emotional and I guess functional connotations of that as an image. It's a North Star that shines bright, that everyone is directed towards. If you have a belief, then it is much easier then to focus your brand. You'll know where you've come from, where you are now, and where you are heading, and how you're going to approach that future. And if you have focus, then it's much easier to also direct your ambition towards that focus. But ambition is key if it's going to power your belief. It's the inspirational goal that doesn't sit on a balance sheet, that essentially gets us all out of bed in the morning. Ian, next. So let's just come on to people. And the 3 component parts of people are imagination, motivation, and expertise. Imagination, I guess, is one of the things that makes us human. It's what we need if we're going to be creating new ideas that don't exist yet, if we're able to laterally make connections across disparate sources. So Ken Robinson described imagination as, and I love this, as the source of every form of human achievement, and curiosity as its engine. It is fundamental to the way that we think as human beings, and yet so little time, I think, is spent in business looking at how we unlock more of it and really help it to flourish. Imagination can be nothing, though, without motivation. Motivation is what jumpstarts creativity and stops it grinding to a standstill. So you could have a massively imaginative bunch of people. If they're not motivated to apply their imagination, then it's underperforming. And lastly, expertise. So you may have an imagination and motivation, but you absolutely need expertise. It is your toolkit. It is your ammunition for your imagination to work. And the more expertise, the more you have to work with, and the more you're capable of challenging conventions. Interestingly, what we found is just how much organisations tend to prioritise hard expertise, the hard skills that underpin someone's job role, whereas actually it's often the softer skills, the lateral thinking, the leadership, the creativity that'll actually power how you problem solve and take that forward. And then the last pillar is of course culture, and the 3 component parts of these are behaviours, support, and environment. And behaviours is a really interesting one. It's the patterns of behaviour and social capital between colleagues and leaders that really shape an organisation's culture. And actually, time and time again, we have seen leadership teams suffer from perspective blindness in this regard. So, you know, it's one of the most difficult things to spot and see these unwritten rules. And often leadership teams find it very difficult to identify those rules at play and how they as leadership teams themselves are perpetuating them. But it has such a huge influence on a business's culture. The second component part is support, and support can come in many forms. Yes, of course, it's about making sure that your people have the technical resources they need to be able to do their job, but it's also about the time, the way the day is constructed to allow people to come together or to collaborate. usually outside of meetings. It's about making sure that external experts are able to come into the business and stimulate thinking. It's about the access people have to you as a senior leadership team to impart your knowledge and expertise and insight. And last but very not least, there is environment. So where you think is important, as important as how you think. I think that's become so much to the fore recently as a result of home working and the flexible working that we are almost inevitably all moving towards. So where you do your thing absolutely has to support creativity, whether you are in an office environment or increasingly not. And actually, it's as much about a mental space as it is a physical one in order for creativity to flourish. Ian, if you can click onto the next slide, that'd be great. So I guess, so those are the 9 conditions. The crucial thing to remember about these 9 is that none of them drive creativity on their own. They are all interconnected parts of a whole, I guess, a bit like a jigsaw. And we all know how frustrating it is when you get to the end of a jigsaw and a piece is missing. If you're using this as a framework to think about creativity on your own business, it's a way of identifying component parts that you may be strong on and areas that you could improve on, because as with any kind of high-performing team, it's always about looking at improving and making marginal gains across multiple areas that will drive competitive advantage. And that's the ethos behind the framework. Nick.
Thanks. Okay, so obviously, hopefully those 9 conditions are pretty recognisable to you, and you probably think, well, I'm doing well in some of those things and less well in some of the others, particularly environment's a challenge for all of us at the moment. But we think of the kind of overall score, really, of all of these things. We've got a diagnostic tool the service Firehaus offers called Spark, which enables us to come in and collect data from agencies and businesses and understand exactly which of these 9 conditions an agency is doing really well on and which ones they're doing badly on. And when we started it, because we knew creativity is quite a complex thing, we weren't really expecting an overall metric which would indicate, you know, there's a big problem here or there isn't. But as we crunched the data and worked through it, we found there was actually a very, very simple metric that could be calculated that helps you decide whether you are, as Ian was saying, a have or have not in terms of creativity in the workplace. And we call this the creativity gap. And in a way, it's a bit like a canary in a mine for, look at that smooth slide transition there, in terms of, it's kind of an emergency symbol in terms of whether you've got a problem or not. And it doesn't tell you exactly where the problem is, and that's where the 9 conditions come in, but it gives you a very good indication of whether you have a problem or not in the first place. And it's a very, very simple thing to work out. So you basically have to ask it. So everyone hopefully can do this right now. It's pretty simple. Ask yourself 2 questions. First one is, out of 10, how creative is your company? So with 10 being the most creative company you're aware of. And then the second question, out of 10, how creative are you? With 10 being the most creative individual that you know or you're aware of. So if everybody thinks of those 2 numbers, writes them down, and then it's very simply, to work out the creativity gap, take one away from the other. And if you've got a positive number at the end of that, you're in a good place. Your canary in its cage is thankfully still alive. If you have a negative number, then you've got a creativity gap at your workplace. Now, obviously, when we run this, we would normally survey the entire business rather than just ask one person, because you get some wobbles in perception there. But generally speaking, if people in your business believe that they are more creative than the business itself, you have a problem. And it doesn't actually matter too much what the absolute scores are. It doesn't matter whether everyone put themselves as a 7 or a 5 or a 2, it's irrelevant. The big difference is the difference between the 2 of them. That's the creativity gap, and that is the warning sign that you've got a problem there. So what I thought I'd share from this is a couple of examples aligned to the 9 conditions that Beth has talked through about how some of the haves and have-nots are doing things across these conditions. So Ian, if you don't mind jumping over. So the first one is rooted in the environment condition. And actually environment is we've seen one of the most important of the 9 in terms of getting it right. So it's a big challenge for everybody at the moment with the current situation. The haves, though, know how important a positive environment is and take responsibility, that being the key bit, for delivering it. Whereas the have-nots provide the bare minimum environment and focus their attention elsewhere. So what this means essentially is, and I think COVID has highlighted this, a lot of brands and a lot of businesses are really focusing, okay, how do I just get people surviving while they're working from home? Or how do I get, how do I just get it so it's like it was, and then we can crack on and concentrate on other things? Whereas actually the best businesses, the businesses that do with the best conditions for creativity, really focus on creating a positive environment at home, in the office, in people's minds, as I'm sure Michelle's going to come on and talk about afterwards. It makes a huge difference if you are focusing on that. So the kind of lesson number 1 is go and ask your staff, what can we do to make this better? How can we enable you to have different areas to think in? How can we enable you to improve your mental health, that kind of thing? So the environment you're working in can support your creativity. The second example is one behind the focus condition. So the haves embed a deep understanding of their customer and their challenges across the business, whereas have-nots focus their employees on tasks and functions with a lack of a wider context. And so really here, creativity, one of the many, many definitions of creativity, is that it's about problem solving. But I think that rings true for most people. And if you don't know what the problem is and who the person that's experienced that problem is, you're going to struggle to be creative and to solve problems. And we've noticed a huge correlation between the amount of people who admit to, and in the survey it's phrased as having a thorough understanding of their customer, and the creativity gap. So if you don't know who that person is, you are very, very, you'll find it very, very difficult to solve problems and be creative for them. And we've also noticed that there is a very strong seniority difference between these things. Essentially, as you come in, fresh blood is given tasks and given specific things to do, and not given much of a wider context of the customer and the person they're solving these things for. So you may feel that you have a very, very strong understanding of your customer and their needs and wants, but ensuring that everyone in the business has that is a really critical thing. The third example is around support. So the haves provide accountability and support in equal measure, whereas the have-nots see increases in responsibility as an opportunity to remove some of their own responsibilities. So this comes through to us. When we run our diagnostic, we also run a lot of interviews to kind of get under the skin of the data. And people often confide in us, the kind of senior level, that they've been promoted. And it was a great company and they were very creative in a particular role. They've been promoted and suddenly the kind of support has been whipped away from underneath them. And they've suddenly found themselves in a very tenuous position where they've got these challenges and problems and they don't know how to overcome them. Yet they feel that there's this kind of onus on them to not ask for help because of their responsibilities, their new responsibilities and their new promotion. Whereas in the haves, the businesses that do really well on the creativity gap, they promote people and they reward people, and they certainly don't micromanage or kind of constantly handhold, but they maintain that level of support regardless of where you are in the business. They change it, so it's less about particular things and more about other things as you go up the ranks, but they never see promotion as an opportunity to reduce support. There's an interesting extra bit to this as well, because obviously training is a big part of support, and basically wherever you go, people want more training, which is I think something we're all familiar with as running agencies. But interestingly, agencies that spend a lot of money in terms of hard skills, so Photoshop or how to do a particular planning process or whatever, that actually correlates negatively with the creativity gap. So an increase in investment in hard skills doesn't really increase your creativity, we've found. What does, though, is an increased investment in soft skills. So leadership training, creativity training itself, coaching, mentoring, that kind of thing. That, if the more you spend there, the bigger increase in your in the positive creativity gap. So it's really critical to think, how can I change support as people move up the ranks, but not necessarily reduce it? The fourth example is that the haves recognize they're responsible for the conditions for creativity, not all the ideas. Whereas the have-nots fixate on their own creativity and rely on it as an example to their employees. So it's very strange. When we get the poor creativity gap, we always think when we go into interviews with leaders of businesses and agencies, that they're going to mention this kind of aphorism, which comes back at a worrying rate, where basically they say words to the effect of, it's not as creative as it was when I was younger, or back in my day, or you know, when we started, it was creative. And the leadership teams have this kind of us and them mentality, the difference between them and the business they have at the moment. And even in scenarios, when people say that with a level of compassion and empathy for their staff and colleagues, they quite often try and kickstart that creativity by themselves being some beacon of creativity and kind of showing up, look, I can do it. I can look at this great idea, or, you know, let's all do this thing, or this extra project I'm working on. And they believe really passionately and with all the right intentions that that's kind of paving the way for positivity. Whereas in reality, it's creating an environment where the gap between the kind of everyone else and the leadership is so wide, people just step back and can't cross it. So the haves recognize that actually having a creative workplace is giving space for your staff to be creative rather than doing it for them. And the final example is around motivation. And the haves very simply celebrate innovative thinking and creativity where they see it, whereas the have-nots reserve the highest praise only for the hardest workers and those who seal the deal. And this is a really, really easy thing to do. All we need to do as leaders of businesses is when we see creativity, call it out and say, that was brilliant. Tell everyone in the business, I saw this and I thought it was fantastic because it was so creative, because it was innovative. And bringing that up to the level of people that worked the weekend or won a pitch or whatever is really, really important. It's free. You don't have to give people bonuses or whatever, but that's the critical thing. So hopefully that's brought to life some kind of examples of the haves and have-nots and the 9 conditions of creativity. So Firehaus, Ian, do you mind going on to the next one? Firehaus exists to help businesses close the creativity gap. As we talked about, we've got Spark, which is our diagnostic in terms of, you know, rating either your business or maybe clients' businesses and in terms of their creativity and where on those 9 conditions they're great and where they're falling down. But we've also got our network and training and creativity on tap services, which can really help you kickstart creativity or overcome particular challenges you've got. But with all that aside, I think the one really important thing I would love to leave you guys with is understanding your own creativity gap at the business. And it's so simple to do. So if maybe this afternoon, maybe tomorrow, ask everyone in your business, out of 10, how creative is this company? And out of 10, how creative are you? And simply take one away from the other. You'll have to do it anonymously, just to flag that, because otherwise people tend to obviously suppress their own opinion of their own creativity. But take one away from the other and you'll have a very good indication of where you stand on the creativity gap. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Ian and Beth. We can play that game tomorrow, Pimento Ease, because we've got a Pimento away day, a retreat, obviously virtual one, but we can take the opportunity to actually look at us as an organisation. And it just struck me in the course of that presentation, we'll do questions at the end if we can have time, but it just struck me that this particular proposition dovetails very, very neatly with a number of other consultants we have within the network who work either in other aspects of helping to improve agencies and helping to improve their performance, business development, or whatever it happens to be. as well as some of our research members too, so people like Annabelle and others. So I'm sure that on your partner development plan, Andy will have identified those, but it's good to see how you fit within the Pimento sphere and the opportunities, both client side as well as direct and working with other members of the network. Right, Michelle, where are you, my darling? I'm going to hand over to you and unblock you. Where are you? There you are. Brilliant. If you could unshare your screen, please, Ian. Thank you. And I'll now hand over to Michelle.
Can you see me?
We can see you. And we can
Excellent. It works. First time. Amazing. Getting used to this thing. Thank you so much for having me, everybody. And it is really good to be back with a slightly longer slot this time. And isn't it interesting to see, you know, what has happened over this, what now feels quite a long period of time. I think a lot of the things that I was doing for you was kind of upfront in the beginning. And that was just such a brilliant presentation from Firehaus. Thank you so much. And in the crudest way, and please forgive me, team, when I say this, but I was kind of sitting here thinking, actually, if you took the word creativity out and put the words mental health in, so much of this is true. And if I was going to really muck up your beautiful 9 squared framework, you kind of cover it in an environment, but I think I'd be really keen to put health in, and by health I mean physical and mental health, because my view is that is absolutely essential to support creativity. And of course, everyone can be creative, not just the creatives. Everyone has mental health, and everyone is vulnerable to experiencing poor mental health, especially at the moment, especially during the pandemic, where we are facing great threat. So I always like to start with a bit of a how are you, everybody? Maybe you can just put 1 or 2 words into the comments. And Stephen, can you be my lovely assistant and read some of the words out so I don't cut myself off and out from the presentation?
Yes, of course. So we've got feeling groovy, which is always a good one. Up and down, pretty good. Never enough time. Tired and a late night last night. Feeling positive, motivated.
Yeah, brilliant. You know, and every time I ask this question, you always get a variety of responses. And probably if I asked any one of you this afternoon or tomorrow or yesterday, your response quite possibly was very different as well. I asked that question to help us, all 22 of us, become more present in this presentation. I hope you were for Firehaus. Sometimes the webinar can be something that is easy to just have one ear on. But it's important to have 2 ears on the topic of creativity and also the topic of mental health and being present. So I'm going to ask you, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes or lower your gaze. This is going to be a 1-minute exercise, so don't worry, it's not too woo-woo. I'm going to ask you to take in a deep breath and maybe notice where your focus for your breath is right now. It may be coming from your belly, from your chest, maybe from your throat. Maybe you're noticing the cold air as it comes in, as you breathe in through your nostrils. And as you breathe out of your nostrils, the difference, the warmth. These are our areas of focus. They're our anchor points. And the wonderful thing is, we do always have our breath as living human beings, every single one of us. And I'm going to come back to this shortly. Maybe take a deep breath in. And when you're ready, open your eyes. and come back into the Zoom. It's okay. I didn't hypnotize you then. Okay. And I wonder how you are now. I'm not going to ask you to share out loud, but just check in with yourself after 1 minute's silence, apart from me talking at you, and just check in with yourself now and see if there's been any kind of difference to your immediate mood state. So I'm just going to do a quick refresher. Some of you will know these facts and stats, but it's always good to have a bit of a reminder in terms of where we're at now, but also where we've been. So 8 weeks into lockdown, and Paul Woolley and I referenced this in a paper that we wrote together, which was as a result of meeting through one of these webinars that Pimento puts on. The Lancet Psychiatry highlighted the urgent need to tackle the harmful effects of COVID on mental health, and the view was that the pandemic could have a profound and pervasive impact globally on mental health now and in the future. And in many ways, it's almost its own pandemic that I think is rising already. And I expect, not that I'm an official forecaster, but I expect this time next year we'll be facing just an even greater challenge with mental health. Yesterday, if you look on the news, if you haven't seen it already, Public Health England launched a mental health campaign aimed at children and young people, and this is the poster from it. Can I even hug my best friend? Am I going to make my nana sick? How can I have fun in a face mask? When is it safe to go? Where is it safe to go anyway? And these are the questions that many kids are asking themselves, but surely you're asking yourself these questions as well. Really normal questions in a really not normal year. And this is just one of many mental health campaigns and messages that have already come out. There's a huge amount of resources. There's a huge amount of narrative around this, and there will be more. So please seek it out, and I'll do my best to try and share the useful bits with you. So 2/5 of children and young people are now more lonely than they were before lockdown, more worried, more sad, more stressed. Isn't that awful that our kids can identify what stress is aside from sadness and worry? And the parents are really struggling with this as well, because a lack of knowing how to best support their children's well-being means that they're not doing it. They're frightened to do anything. They don't know, and they really want some guidance. Back in January 2020, before the world tipped upside down, there was a Deloitte paper. Again, if you're interested in this topic, I really urge you to seek it out and have a good old read. It's really robust. And they've released new figures on the cost of poor mental health to UK employers. That was 45 billion each year. That was on the rise. That was in January. This was before coronavirus took hold. They also found that on average, for every £1 spent on supporting their people's mental health, employers were getting back £5 on that investment through reduced presenteeism, absenteeism, and staff turnover. Now, presenteeism, I think, is a really interesting one there, because I think with so many businesses working from home, there is going to be more presenteeism ever now than there is absenteeism. People will work on through because they don't have the boundaries between the workplace and working from home. So please watch out for that. This all too was before the coronavirus took hold. And then the analysis also shows, this is the name of the Deloitte paper, that you get that higher return on investment by early intervention, by early action, by looking at prevention, or at least getting in there quickly when someone is experiencing poor mental health, versus how much it's going to cost us, how much it's going to cost the business, how much it's going to cost that person experiencing poor mental health, and the length of time and in-depth support needed when they are struggling and it's taken too long for them to either feel they can ask for help or for someone to ask them if they need help. Once again, this all too was before coronavirus. This was what someone said to me, a brilliant guy, owns an agency. I have an awful lot of respect for him, but he said, Michelle, I'm sorry, mental health training now sits on our non-essential budget line. That really made me want to weep, because at what cost? At what cost? At what cost on that moral imperative, that human, but the business imperative as well, and that imperative on creativity, as Firehaus have shown us. And it was at that point, when he said that to me early on, that I started, you know, I knew he wouldn't be the first and only person to share that with me. So I tried to work out how I could design something that was, rather than face to face and just for kind of one client at a time, that could be for more clients, more people, more accessible, more affordable. So that's what I've been working on. And these two stats are taken from, Stephen, you're going to have to remind me of that brilliant agency that have been sharing the stats throughout, that are part of Pimento, that you got in a few weeks ago, because I've nicked the stat from them. I can't remember their name.
Savanta?
Yeah, that's them. You know, and all the way through, when surveyed, 30% of employees are saying that their mental health had gotten worse during this time, versus physical health at 13%. And the businesses, the leaders are saying the same. And I'm sure what most of you know now is that our brains are hardwired to make so much of modern life difficult for us. It's the fight, flight, freeze response. It's especially true when it comes to dealing with uncertainty, because our brains are doing the thing that they're built to do, which is protect us, to defend our families and our communities. And that's even more so when you're facing uncertainty, plonk in a pandemic as well. And, you know, it's going to be really tough for people. But there is a positive. If you embrace this, if you know about it, if you're aware of it, you can begin to override your brain's irrational tendencies and then be able to handle uncertainty more effectively. And I'm going to just take you back to that minute that we did, which is called mindfulness, which many of you will think, I can't do that because my mind wanders all the time. But the practice is noticing when your mind wanders, bringing it back to your anchor point, which was the breath point that you identified. You have that, and it will support you to respond rather than react. And so much of this applies to the topic of mental health. It starts that fight, flight, freeze response. You know, that awkward moment, the awkward pause, when I'm going to tell you about my mental health and how I burnt out and I had clinical depression and I had general anxiety disorder. Or I'm going to ask you how your mental health is. We don't know how it's going to land. We don't know how the other person is going to respond. That is a natural reaction. And so our natural reaction so much of the time is to flee, is to run, is to not ask or not tell. And I had that awkward pause. I had that awkward comment just before I stepped out of my agency, Liberty, when I burnt out. As I was about to communicate to my business family that I was struggling with physical health and also mental health issues, someone said to me, you know, Mish, it's a bit awkward when you talk about your mental health. And I remember where I was standing in the middle of my office in Brixton when that happened. And I have a terrible memory, but I remember that moment. And it was crushing and it was silencing. And I stopped talking about my mental health, which stopped me from getting help, which meant that I didn't get into a place of recovery for much longer than I should have. And it makes us feel a bit like this in that moment. You know, this is what I'm thinking, and gulp, this is what I'm feeling, and that's all kicking in. But we can override. And what I have discovered is that if we push on through, if we take that moment, if we step into the space of awkward, we own the moment, we own the space, we hold the space, we own the awkward, and better still, if we own our awkward, I have developed deeper, more meaningful relationships with people as a result of that. I've also gotten help more quickly when I've been struggling, and I have struggled since, because it's the ups and downs of life and mental health. So my manifesto really has become Own Your Awkward, and that's what I'm developing lots of my training around, and just kind of creating this movement where we're not afraid to step into the awkward moment and be a bit afraid, but we're not going to run away. We're going to feel like we can ask for help. We're going to feel like we can offer help or ask someone how they're feeling. So with that in mind, I'm going to just take you really top line, because I'm mindful of time. We're 13 minutes in, and it would be good if we had Q&As just at the end. But I've built this framework, which I kind of position as a few steps before mental health first aid, which I teach, which I'm an ambassador for, which I think everyone should do, but not everyone's ready to do it. Not everyone can put the time in. It just doesn't feel right for everyone. So this kind of comes a couple of baby steps before, and I've called it sense, because actually talking about our mental health is so much about common sense. And when I train people, about halfway through the day or the session, they go, oh, it's just common sense, really, isn't it? So if you can use the common sense and take away the fear factor or the awkward factor, you know, it's not going to be rocket science. So the S is about safety. It's about creating a safe space for someone. E is for empathy. Okay, we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Non-judgment is critical. Support, essential, and encouragement will be the thing that actually helps create change and recovery. So what do we mean by safety? Well, it's creating a safe space to have a conversation. So this is a cultural aspect, you know, the same as creativity. What environment have you created in your business that it means there is a safe space to ask someone how they are, or indeed tell someone how they're feeling? Empathy. Look, let someone talk freely. Truly listen to them. Find a way to connect with them. Even if you just don't understand what they're experiencing, no, it's not about you. You've got to try and step into another space, which is being non-judgmental and experiencing that we are all different. We celebrate difference in the same way that we should be celebrating creativity, in the same way that we should be celebrating when a business can talk about mental health. Accept someone's experience as their own. Support them. Let them know that they're not alone. People think that they're the only one experiencing this, especially high performers sometimes, not all. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. I did brief him, but. And the final one is encouragement. And actually, this is about, you don't have to take the burden and shoulder taking someone through all of their mental health challenges. That is not right. I doubt anyone on this call is a mental health professional. I am not a mental health professional. If you're a mental health first aider, you are not a mental health professional. So this is about encouraging people towards help and going back to support, letting them know that lots of different things are available. And sometimes you've got to have patience and perseverance to find the right thing for you. So that support needs to be ongoing. The encouragement needs to be ongoing. Not everything will work at first. So that's sense. But actually, I realized that there's an important sixth letter that kind of turns sense into senses, which is sort of beautiful, a little bit woo-woo, but that's me. And that is the sixth sense. And actually, you know what? You know that feeling, your gut feeling when something doesn't feel right with someone else. Not always, because poor mental health can be hidden. It can be covered up. So you won't always know. You won't always see the signs, and you should never berate yourself for that. But sometimes you have a gut feeling. So if in doubt, ask. Do not be afraid to ask and act. So with all of that in mind, on just over 16 minutes, let's do this. I'm going to own my awkward. I encourage you to own your awkward. And in doing so, we create the right conditions for mental health, but also creativity. Look, these things are absolutely aligned. It is a moral imperative. But if you don't care about that, there is a business advantage to getting your head around this as well. And that's me.
Thank you very, very much. I always enjoy and find your talks inspiring, and I think dovetail beautifully with what we heard from Firehaus earlier on, and something that we all need to take to heart. There is a program of events and activities that we put together at a highly discounted rate for those that are interested in getting involved. I'm particularly concerned about the fact that we're walking into a period of basically end of furlough, possibility of actually significant redundancies across the industry. And I think people will need more help than ever before. So if you and your agency, or you know of an agency, or you know somebody who may be in a position where they perhaps might be made redundant, or indeed for those colleagues that are going to carry on working in their environments, albeit from home or somewhere between home and work, please do get on to Michelle. We're trying to get this program up and running as soon as we can. I think this is important stuff, and it's worth a little bit of investment. So
can I just quickly say something there? If you have taken time to look at the program and you feel like it's too big, it's not affordable, please talk to me about this. We have massively discounted it. I do value myself. I think it's going to be amazing for anyone that goes on it. However, if you think it is not affordable, just let me know, because we are a community together. You're helping me get it off the ground. So don't let cost be a barrier.
What I'll do is on the note that I send out after today's meeting, I'll put a link to it so you can have a look at it and feedback to Michelle. And as she says, it could be tailored according to any budget ultimately. Cool. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great week. We're not going to actually have a chance, unfortunately, to have a chinwag now and do a few questions, but do fire any questions back to me and I'll share it with our speakers today and connect you all up. And look forward to seeing you all next Wednesday, where we'll be with Andrew Cooper, Lord Cooper of Windrush, taking a very different look at politics, and it'll be quite interesting to see how that impacts upon our mental health. So onwards and upwards. Cheers. Bye-bye, everyone.